Look at that. There are crepuscular rays, therefore God. We're talking about science, and if science leads to atheism. And because typically, before we could explain things like that, people often attributed them to God or gods, depending on what part of the world you're in, all the time. And so as naturalistic methodologies, looking for natural cause, that progressed more and more, we found out, oh, well, God wasn't involved with that, at least not directly. And, the explanatory power of God shrinks, and that's been a tendency for, thousands of years now, as human knowledge has grown. So, not surprisingly, and this is sort of the implication, people like Richard Dawkins would point out that the National Academy of Sciences, which is dominated by people who are atheists, I always thought that was sort of I wasn't happy with making an argument like that. I've never used that sort of argument myself, because it just smacks of propaganda to me. It just reminds me too much of a Christian who would try to argue that Einstein was a theist. Now, Einstein may have been a deist. To me, it's just irrelevant. That's too close to the sort of my dad is stronger than your dad sort of juvenile argument. It just doesn't really interest me. However, I would actually make the opposite claim, that actually science leads to more theism, and it does it this way. Well, when we no longer need God to explain why there are, wonderful, nice, let's see if it'll bring it in to focus again. Yeah, there we go. Why there are nice, beautiful sunsets and crepuscular rays, and we don't need him for that anymore, then apologetics come into play. Goalpost moving comes into play, and you get more ideas of God than you've ever had before. Like the mythical Hydra, you cut off one head, you show that, well, God can't be that sort of God. He can't be the sort of God that directly affects the lighting and sunsets. So we have to come up with another idea of God, and there's more than one way to go about that. So in a way, this naturalistic methodology, aka science, can lead to more concepts of God and a wider range of marketability of the idea of God, and therefore we find ourselves in an era where there are more concepts of God than ever before, so many denominations, and so many ideas of what God is, what He's responsible for, a broad spectrum of people who still, despite what science has shown us, stick their heads in the sand, basically, and still claim that the Bible's literally true, from that end of the spectrum, up to people who, I heard of people who actually don't believe the Bible, but they still regard themselves as Christians. They just like the ideas that Christ presented, or Jesus presented. And they see themselves as part of that tradition, but they don't actually believe it's literally true. So that broad spectrum, we have so many more ideas of what God is, could be, to pick from, that I think, if anything, if you're going to attribute anything to science by exposing the falseness of so many of the claims that are made in the Bible or made about God, in fact, creates more ideas of God, and so it seems like it could be responsible for the great variety of different Christianities and faiths that we see in the earth today. So But I think there could conceivably be an end game. Obviously, religions do become extinct. I don't think there's anyone who's seriously worshiping Zeus anymore. And I think one day this Yahweh thing will get old. But it's going to have to be because one of the core beliefs were refuted. And my guess is that it might come from psychology, in that we may be on the edge now where we can actually watch the brain in real time as people think, and we can tell that what they're thinking, and we can even tell what they're deciding before they're deciding it. That calls into question the idea of free will. And if we don't have free will, then we don't have our excuse for God as a benevolent being. And I think if you can disrupt the idea of God as a benevolent being, then we might be able to bring an end to the cult of Yahweh by demonstrating that if there's no free will, then the apologists for God can't blame the victims anymore. See, in the problem of evil, one of the outs for the problem of evil is to say, well, God can't interfere. Though he's benevolent, he can't interfere with our free will. And he has to allow us to, decide to come to him. Well, without a free will, or a self, because that's something that psychology and neuroscience is calling into question, they may be stuck with the malevolence of God, and that could be the end. Anyways, what are your thoughts? That is on science's relationship to religion. Does it cause atheism? Or, as I'm suggesting, could science, as analogous to the myth of the Hydra, by cutting off one concept of God, does it actually just open the floor for a number of other concepts of God, which will have a certain degree of marketability in modern society? And so we could perpetuate theism by that way, always continually refreshing it by the action of science. And so science actually refreshes and rejuvenates and helps religion evolve. So that's my idea. Disagree? Tell me about it. 72daystar, out. The sun's just gone down. Yay.